as documented in that Forbes piece, and also the WSJ. Archegos used derivatives called total return swaps, which emulate the performance of stocks but don't have the Form 13F disclosure requirements that equities do.
The Everything Short. BYU Atabit. The 4th of January 2021 edit. Great news apes. You don't fight the volume has been reviewing my post and helping me address weaknesses. I take this as really good news as we move another step closer to exposing the truth. Furthermore, I am making updates that take speculative connections out of this post. The first one being the WSJ article covering BlackRock, where the Fed has tapped them to purchase bonds for the government. These bonds consist of mortgage-backed securities and corporate bonds, not treasuries. While this does not destroy the concept within the post, it does remove a link between the speculative relationship of BlackRock and Citadel. Citadel is still shorting bonds, other hedge funds are shorting bonds, BlackRock just isn't buying treasuries from the government. There are plenty of other financial institutions lending out the treasury bonds. We are still discussing the post and I will make updates as they are available. Stay tuned. TLDR: Citadel and friends have shorted the treasury bond market to oblivion using the repo market. Citadel owns a company called Palafox Trading and uses them to exclusively short and trade treasury securities. Palafox manages one fund for Citadel, the Citadel Global Fixed Income Master Fund Limited. Total assets over $123 billion and 80% are owned by offshore investors in the Cayman Islands. Their reverse repo agreements are entirely rehypothecated and they cannot pay off their own repo agreements until someone pays them first. The entire global financial economy is modeled after a fractional reserve system that is beginning to experience the mother of all margin calls. This is why the DTC and FICC are requiring an increase in SLR deposits. The madness has officially come full circle. My fellow apes, after writing Citadel has no clothes, I couldn't shake one major issue. Why do they have a balance sheet full of financial derivatives instead of physical shares? Even Melvin keeps the derivative exposure to roughly 20%. WhaleWisdom.com, Melvin Capital 13F 2020. The concept of a hedging instrument is to protect against price fluctuations. Hopefully you get it right and make a good prediction, but to have a portfolio with literally 80% derivatives, absolute insanity. It is the complete opposite of what should happen, so what is going on? Let's break this into 4 parts: repurchase and reverse repurchase agreements, treasury bonds, Palafox Trading, short seller endgame. Okay, 4 easy steps, as simple as possible. Step 1, repurchase and reverse repurchase agreements. WTF are they? A repurchase agreement is much like a loan. If you have a big juicy banana worth $1 million and need some quick cash, a repo agreement might be right for you. Just take that banana to a pawn shop and pawn it for a few days, borrow some cash, and buy your banana back later, plus a few tendies in interest. This creates a liability for you because you have to buy it back, unless you want to default and lose your big beautiful banana. Regardless, you either buy it back or lose it. A reverse repo is how the pawn shop would account for this transaction. Why do they matter? Repos and reverse repos are the lifeblood of global financial liquidity. They allow for super fast conversions from securities to cash. The repo agreement I just described is happening daily with hedge funds and commercial banks. In fact, the submitted amount for repo agreements today, 3/29, was $40.354 billion. This amount represents the one-day repo due on 3/30. So yeah, super short-term loans usually a few days. It's probably not a surprise that back in 2008 the go-to choice of collateral for repo agreements was mortgage-backed securities. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt because they fraudulently classified repo agreements as sales. You can do your own research on this, but I'll give you the quick and dirty. Lehman would go to a bank and ask for cash. The bank would ask for collateral in return and Lehman would offer mortgage-backed securities, MBS. It's great having so many mortgages on your balance sheet, but WTF good does it do if you have to wait 30 years for the cash? So Lehman gave their collateral to the bank and recorded these loans as sales instead of payables with no intention of buying them back. This extremely overstated their revenue. When the market started realizing how *TTY these AAA securities actually were, thanks to Michael B. Rye and friends, they were no longer accepted as collateral for repo loans. We all know what happened next. The interest rate in 2008 on repos started climbing as the cost of borrowing money went through the roof. This happens because the collateral is no longer attractive compared to cash. My favorite bedtime story is how the Fed stepped in and bought all of the mean, toxic assets to save the US economy. They literally paid Fannie and Freddie over $190 billion in bailouts. A few years later, MF Global would suffer the same fate when the European repo exposure triggered a massive margin call. Their foreign exposure to repo agreements was nearly 4.5x their total equity. Both Lehman and MF Global found themselves in a major liquidity conundrum and were forced into bankruptcy. Not to mention the other losses that were incurred by other financial institutions. Check this list for bailout totals. But, did you know this happened again in 2019? Instead of the gradual increase in rates, the damn thing spiked to 10% overnight. This little blip almost ruined the whole show. It's a huge red flag because it shows how the system must remain in tight control. One slip and it's game over. The reason for the spike was once again due to a lack of liquidity. The Federal Reserve stated there were two main catalysts, click the link, both of which removed the necessary funds that would have fueled the repo market the following day. Basically, their checking account was empty and their utility bill bounced. It became apparent that another infusion of cash was necessary to prevent the whole damn system from collapsing. The reason being, institutions did not have enough excess liquidity on hand. Financial institutions needed a fast replacement for the MBS, and J-Power had just the right thing. Fed go burr. But don't say it's QE. Step 2. Treasury bonds. Ever heard of the bond market? Well, it's the red-headed stepbrother of the stonk market. The US government sells you a treasury bond for $1,000 and promises to pay you interest depending on how long you hold it. Might be 1%, might be 3%, might be 3 months, might be 10 years. Regardless, the point is that purchasing the US Treasury bond, in conjunction with mortgage-backed securities, allowed the Fed to keep pumping unlimited liquid tendies into the repo market. Surely, liquidity won't be an issue anymore, right? Now, take the repo scenario from the Lehman Brothers story, but instead of using only mortgage-backed securities, add in the US Treasury bond, primarily the 10-year. Note that MBS are still prevalent at 19.1% of all repo transactions, but the US Treasury bond now represents a whopping 67%. For now, just know that the US Treasury has replaced the MBS as the dominant source of liquidity in the repo market. Step 3. Palafox trading. Ever heard of Palafox trading? Me either. It's pretty much meant to be that way. Palafox Trading is a market maker for repurchase agreements. Initially, they appear to be an innocent trading company, but their financial statements revealed a little secret. Are you kidding me? I should have known. Of course, Citadel has their own private repo market. Who else is in this cesspool? Everything rolls into the Citadel Global Fixed Income Master Fund. This controls $123,218,147,399, that's billion, in assets under management. I know offshore accounts are But when you look at the itemized holdings of these funds on Citadel's most recent Form ADV, it gives me chills. Okay, let me get this straight. The repo market provides immediate liquidity to hedge funds and other financial institutions after the MBS collapse in 2008. The U.S. Treasury replaced it as the liquid asset of choice. Citadel owns 100% of Palafox Trading, which is a market maker for repo agreements. This market maker provides liquidity to the Global Fixed Income Master Fund Limited, GFIL, through Citadel advises 80% of its $123,218,147,399 in assets under management belong to entities in the Cayman Islands, Paradise, and Panama Papers apart, and found that all of these funds boil down to just a few managers, but can't pin anything on them for money laundering. However, if there ever were a case for it, I'd be extremely suspicious of this one. The level of shade on all this is incredible. There should be no room for an investment pool as big as Citadel to hide this sh*t, absolutely ridiculous. The fact that there is so much foreign influence over our bond and repo market, which controls the liquidity of our country, is very concerning. Step 4, Short Seller Endgame. Alright, I know this is a lot to take in. I've been writing this post for a week, so reading it all at one time is probably going to make your head explode. But now we can finally start putting all of this together. Okay, remember how I explained that the repo rate started to rise in 2008 because the collateral was no longer attractive compared to cash? That means there wasn't enough liquidity in the system. Well, this time the opposite effect is happening. Ever since March 2020, the short-term lending rate, repo rate, has nearly dropped to 0.0%. So the Fed is printing free money, the repo market is lending free money, and there's basically no difference between the collateral that's being lent and the cash that's being received. With all this free money going around, it's no wonder why the price of the 10-year Treasury has been declining. In fact, hedge funds are so confident that the 10-year Treasury will continue to decline, that they've shorted the 10-year bond market. I'm not talking about speculative shorting, I mean shorting it to oblivion like they've shorted stocks. Don't believe me? Hedge funds like Citadel advisors must first locate the Treasury bond in order to swap them for cash in the repo market. It's extremely difficult to do this with the Fed because they're tied up in government BS, so they locate a lender in the market. These consist of other commercial banks and hedge funds. Note, I made a comment about BlackRock supplying Treasury bonds, and this is not true. Upon further review, credit you, don't fight the volume. These bonds consist of MBS and corporate bonds. While the U.S. Treasury Department is involved, they are not supplying Treasury bonds. So financial institutions keep treasuries on reserve for hedges like Citadel to short. Citadel comes along and asks for the bond, they throw it into Palafox Trading and collect their cash. So what happens when they need to pay for their repo agreement? Surely to God there are enough bonds floating around, right? Not unless hedge funds like Citadel have shorted more bonds than there are available. Here's the evidence. There have been 3 instances over the past year where the repo rate dipped below the failure rate of -3.0%. On March 4, 2021, the repo rate hit -4.25%, which means that investors were willing to pay someone 4.25% interest to lend their own money in exchange for a 10-year Treasury bond. This is a major signal of a squeeze in the Treasury market. It's major desperation to find bonds. With the Federal Reserve purchasing them monthly from the open market, it leaves room for a shortage when the repo call hits. If commercial banks and hedge funds haven't purchased more treasuries since first lending them out, short sellers simply cannot cover unless they go into the market and pay the bond holder for their bond. It's literally the same story as all of the heavily shorted stocks. Still not convinced? At the end of 2020, Palafox Trading listed $31,257,102,000 billion in gross repo agreements. $30,576,918,000 billion were directly related to repurchasing Treasury bonds. But what about their reverse repurchase agreements? Don't they have assets to buy Treasury bonds? Sure. Take a look. See there, I told you they had it covered. Yeah, now read the fine print. I know the totals are slightly different than the balance above, but they're both from 2020. It's just how they are presented. Check for yourself. https://sec.report/6/000128417 closing parenthesis. So no, they don't have it covered. Why? Because our POS financial system allows for rehypothecation, that's why. It's a big fancy word for using amounts owed to you as collateral for another transaction. In the event that the party defaults, so do you. This means that the securities which Palafox is waiting to receive have already been pledged to pay off the bonds they currently owe to someone else. Does this sound familiar? Promising to repay something with something you don't already have. Basically, you need to wait on Ted to repay Steve, to repay Jan, to repay Mark, to repay you, so you can repay Fred, so Fred can. Yeah, REAAAL secure. Oh, and by the way, the problem is getting worse. Here's Palafox's financial statements in 2018 and 2019. The amount in 2020 is still plus 100% greater than 2019 after netting, which is even more bullshit. All of this made me wonder what the FICC's balance is for Treasury deposits. For those of you that don't know, the FICC is a branch of the DTCC that deals with government securities. Just like the updated DTC rule for supplemental liquidity deposits being calculated throughout the day, the FICC also calculates this amount as it relates to Treasury securities multiple times throughout the day. Would you be surprised that the FICC has $47 billion just in deposits for unsettled Treasury bonds? $47 billion. Can you imagine how astronomical the actual margin must be? There is too much evidence, from too many separate events, pointing to the imminent default of something big. That's all this is going to take. When Ted can't repay Steve, it means the panic has already started. Just look at how easy it was for the repo rate to spike overnight in 2019. We are already starting to see the consequences of the SLR update with Archegos, Nomura, and Credit Suisse. This is just a taste of what's to come, and now we know the bond market represents an even bigger catalyst in triggering this event, and it's happening already. With that being said, things finally started to make sense. Citadel doesn't need shares if their investment strategy to go short on everything instead of going long. Why bother owning shares? Financial institutions and other asset managers simply lend them to you when you need to pony up a margin call for stocks and bonds. Their HFT systems allow them to manipulate the market in their favor, so there's no way they could fail, unless a bunch of degenerates all decided to ignore taking profits. But that would never happen, right? Wrong. We just like the stonks diamond, F***king, hands, this is not financial advice. Nice job putting this together. Palafox and Citadel are magically on the same floor in the same building equals D. This is going to go tits up for them pretty fast when word gets out more. Is this not what Burry was tweeting about before the SEC shut him down? I wonder what he's shorting currently. I feel like what I'm reading is illegal. It's truly bizarre and absurd how they let it come to this. I'm not a US citizen, but I'm actually afraid what the effect will be on Europe and perhaps the rest of the world. This is truly fucked up. LMAO, I'm scared.
Official Alexis Goldstein, Friday, April the 2nd at 11 a.m. EST mod announcement Gorilla Hi all, Alexis Goldstein here. I'll be doing an this Friday the 2nd of April at 11 a.m. EST. A little bit about me, I currently work advocating for a safer and fairer economy. But I started my career on Wall Street. I worked as a programmer at Morgan Stanley in electronic trading, and as a business analyst at Merrill Lynch and Deutsche Bank in equity derivatives. I recently testified before the House Financial Services Committee in their second hearing about GameStop. You can find my written testimony here. I also discussed the GameStop situation on Twitch with AOC back in February. Here is a clip of our discussion. Here are two recent appearances of mine on C.
So in a way, with all of the potential activity, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in a way, are you saying that you have all of these Wall Street actors that are seeing what's going on potentially with this online activity and saying, well, we know that there's going to be a high volume of buys ahead of time, so I'm also going to buy under kind of the guise of all of this online activity going on, and then potentially make out on top of it as well.
Yes.
That's what you're saying too? So
yes, that is my suspicion, yes.
So yeah, so you suspect that this is not just Redditors buying this stock, but that it's also potentially larger actors on the market, and that's something to explore, that this is potentially larger actors on the market looking at activity happening ahead of time and then getting ahead of it that as well, and almost using that as a veneer for riding this stock.
Yeah. And there's one other wrinkle to all of this that I think is important for folks to know, which is a lot of folks have used the app Robinhood, which I like to think of as the Facebook of stock trading. And I say that because Facebook is sort of designed to keep you on Facebook, right? It's designed to grab your attention and keep your attention. And Robinhood is very similar. I would describe it as gamified. I know a lot of Robinhood folks would disagree with that assessment. That's just my personal assessment. But Robinhood is free. It doesn't charge commission. And the way that their business model works is they sell their order flow to market makers, which are these sophisticated Wall Street participants who execute the orders for them. The market maker they sell the most of their flow to is a hedge fund named Citadel. And Citadel is not just a hedge fund. They are also a market maker. They are also a technology company. They are owned by a billionaire named Ken Griffin, who is out of Chicago, who has funded some very questionable things in his political giving. But Citadel pays for Robinhood's order flow. And strangely enough, or maybe not so strangely, one of the hedge funds that Wall Street Bets was very excited about blowing up, Melvin Capital, was rescued by Citadel after it blew up. So Citadel is paying for the order flow on Robinhood, which is driving up the price of the stock, which crashed one hedge fund. And then Citadel sort of bought that hedge fund on the cheap after it crashed.
And so, for folks at home, so that we can put these dots together, because I think this is.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming today.
Is this the armor, or will there be a dedicated new post? Sorry if it was asked before, what languages do you prefer to use? Linux, Windows or Mac? When moon laughing face, asterisk.
Do you mean programming languages? If so, I'm partial to Python. You can do so much, with so little code. Linux or Mac. But, if I need to crunch things in Excel, it's nice to have access to a Windows machine.
Why don't you just use Microsoft Office for Mac? It's as good if not better than on Windows. Excel was originally created for Mac after all. Hi Alexis. This is going to be a bizarre question, but how did you pave your place in your career whilst being a female? Your job career is extremely inspiring, but I've always found people say it's difficult to break ground and really forge a career for yourself in that sector. I wish you all the best in your career and thank you for giving your time. Edit, I don't know who gave me this award, but wow and thank you. I definitely didn't deserve it, but I appreciate it. I wish I knew who it was so I could at least say thank you properly.
There's certainly a lot of deep-seated, structural attitudes that create hurdles for women in finance, and outside of finance. And even out in the world. Just to give one example, There's certainly a lot of deep-seated, structural attitudes that create hurdles for women in finance, and outside of finance. And even out in the world. Just to give one example, some people will comment on women's appearances instead of on the substance of what they say. Hopefully we can all work together to change this. The best generic advice I can give is, work hard, don't give up, and look for mentors who can share what they've learned.
Is an important relationship for us to communicate and map out with you. So basically, also what you're saying now is that you've got Melvin Capital, right? Melvin Capital is the hedge fund that was shorting GameStop. They were the folks that were saying, we're going to make a ton of money. We're going to make a ton of money off of GameStop's stock going down. Wall Street Bets comes in, potentially with folks on Wall Street looking at what Wall Street Bets is doing to kind of supercharge this activity and say, you know what, we're going to make the stock go up, which would, of course, put Melvin Capital into an extraordinarily compromised position, which would essentially prompt them to get bailed out by one of the groups known as Citadel. Now, okay, so Citadel then swoops in as one of the actors to bail out Melvin Capital, but Citadel's owner also co-founded a different Citadel. They're both connected, hence the same name by the same owner. They are two technically different entities, though, but they are with the same founder.
Right. So Citadel LLC is the parent company. Citadel Securities is the market maker that buys the Robinhood order flow. But the parent entity, Citadel LLC, is the one that swooped up Melvin Capital. And Congresswoman, I should just add there were actually two Wall Street firms that bought Melvin Capital, or rescued it, I should say. Citadel and and another one now I'm blanking, of course, on the name, but it's the new fund of Steve Cohen, who you may know as the owner of the New York Mets. And
All right.
And Steve Cohen is famous for all the wrong reasons.
Is what the chat said.
Yes, thank you. Steve Cohen is famous, or infamous, I should say, because he used to have a hedge fund called SAC that pled guilty to insider trading in 2013 and had to shut itself down. And so this is the next iteration of Steve Cohen.
Right. So we've got Citadel and then Point 72, who bail out Melvin Capital, who are relying on GameStop stock to tank. So Citadel swoops in to bail out Melvin Capital. But then meanwhile, this connected Citadel under the same founder, it also receives the advanced information from Robinhood. That's what you're saying?
Yes, and I should clarify that's not unusual. That is allowed. It is something called payment for order flow. During the Obama administration, they raised the question about whether or not that was a good idea. They asked one of their SEC, which is a market regulator, they asked the SEC's advisory committee if payment for order flow was just kind of disguising how you were really paying for stock trading. So the idea is Robinhood is free, you don't pay commission, but the broker is supposed to make sure that they give you what's called best execution. So they execute your trade and either get you the best price or they execute it really, really fast. Citadel is paying Robinhood for that order flow, and they pay them via these things called rebates. And Citadel might pay, whatever they pay. A different market maker may pay a little bit higher rate. And what is not supposed to happen is the broker is not supposed to give the order flow to the highest bidder, because that would prevent them from giving their customers best execution. People should know that Robinhood was accused by the SEC in December of 2020 of not giving their customers best execution and actually costing them $34 million, even when you accounted for the free commissions, because of their failures to provide them with best execution.
So you're saying just a month ago, Robinhood was in trouble for not optimizing their customers' trades?
Yes, it was covering a period of time farther back in time, right? It was, I think, in the 2018 range, but the action came down. Robinhood did not admit nor deny guilt in the action, but they did have to pay a civil penalty to the SEC to settle the charges.
And they did pay that penalty to the SEC. Yes. So these were charges that came up from the SEC just 1 month ago, but these were they were regarding actions that happened in 2018, but that this is documented past behavior from Robinhood.
Correct. And the other thing is Robinhood wasn't disclosing, another part of that action was Robinhood wasn't disclosing that they were paying our market maker for the order flow. So why do I bring all this up? I bring this all up to say, is Robinhood doing the best by their customers? Are these fintech companies that are so easy to use that lots of people are using to trade stocks, are they doing right by their customers? I think that's an important question that regulators should be asking right now.
So let's talk a little bit about what happened today with the freeze that you saw, not just on Robinhood, but on, I believe, E-Trade, Wellbull, etc., where you have a lot of these retail, these retail platforms, all of a sudden putting a halt to some trades on not just GameStop, but there was also some activity, I believe, around AMC and other stocks that have been particularly identified by the subreddit Wall Street Bets. Tell me a little bit about what is going through your head when you see activity like that. And, for folks at home, there are multiple possibilities here. I think a lot of people sometimes want to jump to certain conclusions, but in order for us to really responsibly look at the situation, it does seem like there's more than one potential explanation. But I'm interested in hearing what's going through your head when you see that, and what are some of the possibilities that could arise?
So I just don't know why Robinhood made the decisions they did to stop trading, allowing purchases of certain single name stocks today. Their decision was a little different than some of the other brokerages. So for example, So think of it from the point of view of the brokerage, right? Especially if people are selling stocks short, which has the potential for unlimited losses. If your client goes bust and enough of your clients goes bust, then the brokerage goes bust. Mm-hmm. So what a different brokerage did, not Robinhood, but one called Interactive Brokers and some other brokers on the that regular people use, is they just changed what's called their margin requirements. So if you wanted to buy a stock in some of these really active, volatile names today, you had to supply 100% cash margin. And what does that mean? You basically just had to front all of the money yourself, which might sound funny to people who don't trade stocks, but believe it or not, you can sometimes trade stocks with borrowed money. So they're basically saying you can't borrow any money. You got to trade cold hard cash if you want to buy these stocks. So that's what I sort of would have expected to see from everybody. Instead, what we saw is Robinhood just straight up saying you can't trade in any of these names. Now, I don't know that we know any more than that. Was there, direction coming in from regulators? Was this just a decision made by Robinhood? I don't think we know, but I was a little surprised at their action as it related to what other brokers did. And I should just say, if we can just rewind very slightly, because I forgot to mention this before, about the whole idea of payment for order flow. The reason that's important is because the firm that you give your order flow to knows what your executions are, and they can run in front of it and front run and trade ahead of it and make profits, which may be fine or may not be fine, but I just thought that that's important to mention.
So you're saying, Citadel. Sorry, you're just about to say, and Citadel's the one who receives that advance information from Robinhood. So Correct. All of these folks, but that advance information only lasts for a few seconds, right?
Correct, but Citadel is known, and other entities that do this market making are known for their high frequency trading algorithms. That's their specialty. Mm-hmm. They're experts. They hire tons and tons of programmers, and so they're allowed to make profit ahead of that. Mm-hmm. But I think the question that a lot of people have, and we just don't have enough information to know, is were they doing more with that information than just executing the trades?
And so those are some of the questions that seem to be outstanding, right? Because if Citadel's receiving this advanced trade information from Robinhood, I go on my phone, except not me, because I don't believe members of Congress should own individual stocks, so I don't have any. But hypothetically, if I'm on Robinhood and I hit my order along with thousands of other people at that moment, Citadel is potentially able to get that information milliseconds in advance. And in those milliseconds, their trading algorithms could adjust, knowing that advanced execution information. Is that correct?
Yes. And I'll say that since a lot of the Robinhood trades are very low volumes, what they often do is batch them together. And so Citadel might be trading in much larger volumes and then matching the orders as they batch them together. Again, all in this sort of time of many microseconds. But that's what they specialize in doing, is this very, very high speed, high frequency trading, as it's called.
And so I think here, for folks that are watching at home, this is what raises a bunch of questions, not just from me, but also from, I think, this is why this is starting to attract the attention of regulators, members of Congress, et cetera, because there's a lot of policy questions that come up. Policy questions about shorting stock, policy questions about, as you said, some of this advanced information. You mentioned the Obama administration started to raise some questions about the potential for this. And I think this also is about power, right? Because everyday retail investors don't get that. Even if you were able to, who knows, program something at home, you do not have that millisecond advance information. You just don't have the market power to have that, right?
Right. And I think that's the reason why, yes, lots of people are making money right now. Yes, one or two hedge funds are blowing up, but there's still always going to be a systemic disadvantage that retail has. And that Wall Street is always going to have the advantage. They have more data. As you said, Congresswoman, they're faster. They can execute things faster. And so they're always going to run circles around the little guy, even if it seems like they're losing.
Hi Ms. Goldstein, I think I speak for everyone when I say we are incredibly grateful for your time and perspective on any questions raised within this sub. I thought I'd get my post out early to give a chance for you to potentially review them before the armor. Before I ask my questions, and on a personal note, I just wanted to thank you for when you interjected to offer an alternative perspective on whether Citadel posed a systemic risk to the market in the second hearing. Here https://u2.be/imrechexrq80i?t=9316. I believe this led to the most important discussion of the entire hearing, which as we all now know resulted in Mr. Kelleher's statement later being scrubbed out of the video by CNBC. Please feel free to ignore any question should it put you in any kind of hot water or for time purposes, and please also correct any point if I'm wrong, but with that said, please see below some questions I think this board is interested in related to your expertise. 1. I note you previously worked for large institutions in relation to risk management software among other things. Can I please ask how is it possible these systems allowed a firm like Melvin, who presumably have them, to lose billions in January? 2. Do you think institutions utilizing dark pool and OTC trading, especially in relation to GME and retail buying, results in an unfair ability for entities such as Citadel, who execute the majority of retail trades, to manipulate the lit market price by essentially removing legitimate retail buying pressure from the lit market by routing such purchases in dark pool OTC markets? 3. You mentioned in your testimony that position data and stop losses etc. are likely being mined, collected by institutions. Can you please elaborate on the extent and types of data mining these firms may use so retail investors can protect themselves where possible on public message boards? 4. If you had the sudden ability to change the laws to create a fairer and transparent market, what steps do you think would be the most efficient to achieve this, even if only short term? 5. What kind of impact to the lit market do you think would occur if Citadel and other entities of similar stature were declared as a systemically important financial institutions? 6. Citadel and other firms in a similar role have a very checkered past in relation to fines and enforcement, in your opinion. How likely is it firms such as this are engaging in conduct of a similar type for GME? 7. In your opinion, how likely is it that the DTCC's net settlement and stock borrow program is being abused to falsely represent failure to deliver obligations? If you get a chance to answer any of these, I'd be grateful.
There are a lot of questions here, so I'm just going to start with one for now. For in the short term, a lot of changes that can happen with the laws we have now, through actions by the regulators. The SEC should consider changing reporting requirements on the Form 13F to bring about more transparency. Here's a recent letter I helped to write on the topic. The Financial Stability Oversight Council is able to designate non-banks, be they hedge funds or asset managers or something else, as systemically important, in order to bring more oversight /regulation by the Fed to these entities. Senator Warren asked Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen about this in a recent hearing, regarding the asset manager BlackRock. Here is a video clip of their exchange. One thing that's already happened, which I had previously called for, is that FSEC has now restarted its hedge fund working group. In terms of more steps, here's some more ideas.
Thanks for your time and response. I completely appreciate there are many other great questions on this sub and I wouldn't want to distract away from theirs.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming today.
Is this the armor, or will there be a dedicated new post?
I was going to use this one.
Extremely interested in hearing your thoughts on this topic.
Two big picture thoughts. It is very difficult to truly understand what Citadel, the hedge fund's complete positions are. That's due to a real lack of transparency in the reporting that hedge funds are required to do. Hedge funds managing $100 million or more of certain kinds of securities do have some reporting requirements. These happen quarterly through a form called the 13F. However, they only need to report certain kinds of securities. And they don't need to report short stock sales or short option positions. That makes it hard to know what a fund is doing, or what their net position is. I think more transparency into hedge fund positions would be good for the market overall. Here's a recent letter I helped to write on the topic. 2. I do think that regulators need to be closely monitoring the repo markets and seeing if there are places where reforms are needed. It has the potential to be a source of real risk to the financial system. If you'd like to read more about the repo markets, I suggest this piece from the Richmond Fed.
Not asking for financial advice, just for an assessment from an ape with a few more wrinkles. I wonder how likely it is that Morgan Stanley is also taking a big hit. Someone I know has put quite some money into one of their funds, and I'd like to warn them before they lose all of it. People here keep talking mainly about Citadel, but who else is in this with them?
I actually wrote about this a little bit in my newsletter today. The short version is, we'll know more when Morgan Stanley's Q1 2021 earnings come out. But the reporting around the Archegos fallout has indicated that Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs sold their Archegos-related stock first, ahead of other banks who also acted as a prime broker for Archegos. From the foot, it was like a game of chicken, one person said. By Friday morning, any hopes of coordination had been snuffed out and the floodgates opened when Goldman began pitching global investors on billions of dollars of Archegos-linked stocks. Morgan Stanley joined hours later, and the two sold roughly $19 billion in big block trades that day alone, according to the People.
Legendary Pokemon 29 minutes ago. Hi Alexis, thanks for your time. Canadian here. How do you feel about this whole GME situation in terms of trust in the US markets? You've lost me as a customer, how many more? I've been trading for over a year now. I've been decimated before in pharma stocks by hedgies like Savvy, crappy bastards, and non-pharma by Hindenburg, where they've pushed the price into the ground for no reason besides greed. In total I've lost about 30k. Then I came upon this gem that is GME and want to get my revenge on hedges. In terms of Nasdaq, when Robinhood restricted buying and people were asking is this legal and such, the CEO of Nasdaq said they would have done the same to save the market. But rules should have been in place for hedges to have never created such a bad situation in the first place. They only want to save the market now that we retailers are winning. I've seen thousands of people lose their jobs due to hedges, Toys R Us to name one, and no one did anything then. After GME moons I am done with the US market. Sticking with TSX and OTC after this. The rampant market manipulation is out of control in the US.
Can I ask you a question? Payment for order flow is prohibited in Canada. Curious if you have thoughts on if that's been a positive thing for market transparency and or making clear the true cost of commissions for brokerages in Canada.
It's incredibly positive. Seems to be much less shenanigans in the market and brokerages here. I've never had any issues with any of the ones I use. And it seems like the market makes its moves based on the demand rather than hedge funds manipulating it. But don't mind me, I am a very smooth-brained Canadian ape with only one wrinkle. So speaking only from buying a couple stocks on Wealth Simple, I have not felt like anything was hidden from me or I was paying anything I wasn't made evidently clear of. Am. Zero financial knowledge. Edit. Source. Have been Canadian my whole life. In my opinion, it is 100% better to have PFOF restricted. Why should a market maker be able to see where a retailer's ask sell price is? As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said in the first hearing, the free cost of trades with Robinhood and others like Webull is not really free when it gives the market makers an edge. With this, they can undercut you and place sells below your sell limit in large quantities to momentarily drop the price to trigger your stop loss. When in reality, the cost of the share should be nowhere near this set price. It gives an edge to those with billions and again gives the finger to retailers. I personally pay for commissions with my bank, both during buy and sell, and they are their own clearinghouse, so I know I'm safe. I also get instant deposits and transfers since it goes right to my bank account. Excellent. Gotcha. Legendary Pokemon has been caught. What's your take on senior DTC 2021-005? Any insight into when this might become effective? And, in general, do you think the flurry of newly proposed and implemented DTCC rule changes are related to the GME situation? Modify the DTC Settlement Service Guide and the form of DTC Pledges Agreement. Thanks. Edit. URL for the docs and recent filings. In addition to this question, why should retail investors trust the DTCC to hold hedge funds accountable in the future? In our current situation, I understand that the new policies prevent them from footing the bill for defaulting hedge funds, but why should the DTCC be responsible for regulating naked shorting, especially when they have their own self-interests? Shouldn't regulating Wall Street be the responsibility of the SEC? Essentially, do you believe the new proposed policies, 801,804,805, would be giving the DTCC too much power as a private business, especially when they have their own interests that don't necessarily align with that of the average investor? DTCC policies 801, 804, 805.
While the DTCC is regulated, it is a systemically important financial market utility, or SIFMU for short. See more here. It is not a regulator. It is up to all the financial regulators, together in their joint role as the Financial Stability Oversight Council, to ensure there aren't emerging risks to the financial system, including looking at hedge funds. And the SEC has oversight into hedge funds through certain disclosures on the 13F, for example. I wrote about this a bit here. But, hedge funds do operate in a bit of a regulatory blind spot, because of their exemptions from the Investment Company Act of 1940. Congress could always change this to bring more scrutiny.
Today, lawmakers finally get a chance to grill some key players in the recent GameStop trading frenzy. Our next guest says that the short squeeze drama that played out was not one of David versus Goliath, but really one of Goliath versus Goliath. She's going to explain that to us.
Hey Alexis, first of all I'd like to say it was great to see you raise actual issues during the congressional hearing. Having a voice like you speak in the name of fairer markets and the protection of the little fish retail investors is making me hopeful for the future. The questions I'd like to ask you would be, what kind of laws, regulations are you hoping will come out of the recent hearings and the current market activity? Do you think this will be to the benefit of retail investors? What are your thoughts on the current GameStop $GME volatility? Thanks for your time.
Some thoughts on this here. I also think Congress should consider changes to payment for order flow. They could do an outright prohibition, as exists in Canada and the UK, require brokers to pass any payment for order flow back to its customers. Require brokers allow customers to opt out. I wrote about this a bit in my written testimony at the hearing.
Hi Alexis, if we were to push for change for transparency in terms of disclosures by those operating in the blind spots, what would be the most effective play? Writing into SEC to file complaints or writing directly to Congress? On that note, do you feel that the SEC has insufficient powers to expand their regulatory supervision on these hedge funds operating in the blind spots or creating rules for shorts reporting in addition to the bare-bones 13F filings, or is it a case where they have sufficient powers already, but are somehow choosing not to exercise their powers for whatever reason?
If you have to pick just one, I'd suggest writing to your senators and your congressperson. Calling the office is usually better than emailing, if you have the time. If you have time to do both, a great way to weigh in with the SEC is through submitting public comment to proposed regulations. This is what's called the notice and comment period. Here is a list of the current proposed rules at the SEC. I did this myself many years ago with a group of folks called Occupy the SEC. We wrote a comment letter about closing loopholes in the proposed Volcker rule, which was a ban on proprietary trading by the big banks. Here's an article about that if you want to learn more. The SEC should be able to change 13F requirements on its own. Here's a recent letter I helped to write on the topic.
Why do you think Robinhood pushes margin so hard on their users? It's pretty much impossible for a normal user to get out. Any of the following puts you in margin: fractional shares, instant settlement, Robinhood Gold. Unlike Fidelity, they do not disclose margin positions to their users in their UI. Need to check your monthly statement, which may even be out of date. Opting out of these features cannot be done with the UI. You need to contact their customer support. Also, even turning off margin doesn't convert your existing positions to cash. It seems like they push this extremely hard for some internal business purpose. Can you comment on what they might be doing behind the scenes?
My best guess is that they want to earn the interest that they charge on margin accounts. This is an interesting question for the regulators. Is Robinhood being clear about which accounts are margin or not?
So you think they are making money loaning out the users' shares to short sellers or other borrowers? Do you think this may be related to why the borrow fee for GME is abnormally low despite it being a hard-to-borrow security? Dumb question, but was Wall Street as cutthroat and cold as depicted in movies such as The Big Short or Margin Call?
The short answer is, it's not quite that dramatic. That said, the attitude is certainly cutthroat. People would talk about ripping their client's face off, which is what happens when you give your client a really bad deal, and convince your client that it's a total bargain for them. The long answer is, here is a piece I wrote about my time on Wall Street. Here is a small snippet. On Wall Street it is not frowned upon to rip the faces off one's own clients. If the client is dumb enough to get hoodwinked, that means the client didn't work hard enough. He didn't do his due diligence. In other words, if I screw you, you only have yourself to blame. That is the zero-sum game of trading. But perhaps the zenith of Wall Street fitness is the unpunished cheat. Around the holiday season, interdealer brokers will send gifts to the traders, trying to curry favor with bottles of wine or champagne. Interdealer brokers are brokers who allow Wall Street banks to anonymously trade with one another, since the last thing you want to do if you're Morgan Stanley is let Goldman Sachs know your position, though you may still want to trade with them. But there is a catch to the gift giving. According to FINRA, Wall Street's self-regulatory agency, the brokers are only allowed to spend a maximum of $100 per trader. On slow winter days, the traders would Google the bottles of wine, trying to determine which vendors had cheated. Often they would find that, yes, this vendor breached the limit. The response to the cheat was always the same, a smirk, and an approving nod. It's not about who cheated. It's about who cheated successfully.
So delicious 30 minutes ago. Thoughts on playing Among Us with AOC? Loved your knowledge bombs dropped in that initial stream with her, and especially your insights during the first Congress hearing on GameStop. Thanks for taking your time with us all. Heart.
It was great to appear on Twitch with AOC once. I would be quite happy to play Among Us. I am a newbie at that game though, and thus, pretty bad at it.
Today, lawmakers finally get a chance to grill some key players in the recent GameStop trading frenzy. Our next guest says that the short squeeze drama that played out was not one of David versus Goliath, but really one of Goliath versus Goliath. She's going to explain that to us in just a moment. She was a guest on Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's live Twitch stream last month and talked about this very issue. Joining us right now is Alexis Goldstein. She's a former Wall Street professional who now works as a senior policy analyst at Americans for Financial Reform. Alexis writes about the financial markets in her newsletter, Markets Weekly. And Alexis, it's good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Becky. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit more about your background, because I think that's an important thing that people need to understand on how your opinions have been formed on this. You're a computer programmer, and you worked at a lot of the big Wall Street firms, including Morgan Stanley. What did you do there?
So I was a programmer at Morgan Stanley. We developed a software platform we gave away to hedge funds for free in order to try to solicit their order flow. Then later on, I moved to Merrill Lynch, where I became a business analyst and was the interface between the equity derivatives flow trading desk and the technology team, helping build their internal risk management software and their trading platforms. And then I did the same thing at Deutsche Bank.
So let's talk about first your time at Morgan Stanley, where they were building this this program that they would give away free for the hedge funds. Why? Nothing's ever free. Why would you give this away to hedge funds for free?
So you can think about it, it's in some ways similar to the Robinhood situation, right? The flow of institutional players, of retail players, is very profitable for firms that execute lots and lots of volumes of trades, because it's a volume business. And if you are able to get better execution than your competitors, which I think Morgan Stanley was confident that it was able to do with their sophisticated software and, very fast speeds and various trading algorithms, we could make money off of the volumes of institutional players. And that included hedge funds. And so we wanted to solicit more of their trades to come to us than, say, our competitor, Goldman Sachs.
When you say that you think this is a Goliath versus Goliath situation, what do you mean? You don't think that these were retail investors on the other end of the trade?
So I think Wall Street guards its positions ferociously, right? They don't want you to know what their position is, but they spend a lot of money to try and figure out what their competitors' positions are. And here we had tens of thousands of retail traders posting on the internet not only what their positions were, but what their plans for their positions were in the future. And I think it's highly unlikely that that kind of data would be unused by large Wall Street Goliaths. I think it's probably likely that hedge funds and other major players were watching what the plans of these retail traders were and trying to figure out how they could profit from it, and probably ride the stock all the way up and then ride the stock all the way down. Because look, at the end of the day, the traders that I used to work with at Merrill Lynch and Deutsche Bank, they had their best days when there was extreme volatility and huge price movements. And if I were to make a guess, and I don't have a crystal ball, I think the first quarter earnings for a lot of these large Wall Street firms that have the kinds of flow trading desks in options and equity options like I used to work on are probably going to have a really good quarter because of this volatility.
It's complicated stuff. Washington's going to dig in today, and complicated stuff like this is not always something that's easily discerned through one of these hearings where people have a set number of minutes that they can talk, and a lot of them are trying to grandstand and make attention and get names for themselves. What advice would you give to these lawmakers if they are serious about trying to reform this? What would you tell them?
Well, I think that this is an issue that has the potential to bring a lot of attention to sort of an underregulated market, which includes hedge funds, right, which are regulated, but they are less regulated than the large major banks. And so I think questions that will sort of bring out some transparency into the practices of, say, Citadel LLC, or to the extent that they want to talk to Melvin Capital. I'm not sure you're going to get too many questions directed at Melvin Capital today. I think this is a good opportunity for Congress to sort of set the agenda of how they want to respond to this and ask the question, do we need more regulation? Do we need more transparency? Do we need changes to the kinds of things hedge funds are reporting? And do we need changes to the over-the-counter markets? Because let's not forget, there's a whole marketplace that is not available to retail traders, which is the over-the-counter options market. And I think the regulators are probably going to be asking questions about what were the volumes of options trading in these over-the-counter markets that are totally inaccessible to retail investors. And I think you might see some questions today from Congress about that.
Alexis, we're about out of time, but if you had to pick one thing that struck you as the weirdest practice on Wall Street that didn't make a whole lot of sense, what would it be?
They would try to guess which of their interdealer brokers were in violation of the rules about gifts. So they would often get like bottles of champagne at the end of the year, and you could only give them a gift that was worth $100. And at sort of on a slow day, they would Google it and see who cheated and who broke the rules. And if they found out somebody cheated, they were sort of like, good job, well done. So that was one of the weirder things I thought.
Alexis, we'd love to have you back. I think you have lots of insight about what's happening, and we're going to be following this pretty closely. But thanks for your time today. It's good talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
She used to work on Wall Street. She's now a senior policy analyst with Americans for Financial Reform. Good to talk to you. This is characterized sometimes as a sort of David and Goliath battle. Is it really?
I actually think that what's happening is this is a Goliath versus Goliath battle with David as a little bit of a distraction. So one of the things I learned when I was working on Wall Street before the last and during the last financial crisis is they made the most profits typically on days that had a lot of churn and a lot of price movement. And while I do think that the sort of initial idea to buy stocks like GameStop and some of these other active names may have initially started on a Reddit forum, you know, Wall Street's dream is to know the positions of their competitors, and they try to hide their own position from their competitors. And now you have tens of thousands of people openly posting about not only what their positions are, but what their plans for those positions are. And so what I suspect, right, I don't have enough data to know, but I suspect that Wall Street was sort of going along for the ride and sort of exacerbating and also inflating some of these prices up. And so, and at the end of the day, I think if I were to make a guess, Wall Street is probably going to have an extremely profitable first quarter simply as a result of all of these volumes. And so that's why I think the David versus Goliath narrative might not be exactly what's happening here.
So actually the professionals make money from volatility. In a way, the house always wins.
That's right. It sort of doesn't matter. They're price agnostic, right? As long as there's churn, they have these sophisticated algorithms and price risk management software. And so as long as they're hedging their bets and that's their job, they basically make money regardless of if the price goes up or down. Yes.
I mean, clearly some of the Reddit investors are very sharp and some are making big money. You don't expect that to go on then? It would be naive to think that the professionals are not on social media as well.
It's very likely that some professionals may be posting on social media. I mean, I think that may raise some investigations for them as a registered investment or financial professional. And certainly there are absolutely people on Reddit making lots and lots of money. But I think the sort of bigger question here, right, to your earlier segment, the United States has had a terribly atrocious response to the coronavirus. And we are sort of jostling right now to see an economic package come through. You know, just because there's more people hitting a jackpot at the casino doesn't mean the house isn't winning still. I think people are sort of drawn in by this narrative in the media because a lot of people are hurting, a lot of people are having trouble making rent. And I think the real solution to this speculative mania here in the United States is...
Thanks to you for being with us. Stay with us if you can.
Alexis, you've got kind of an interesting take here. It's not David versus Goliath. In this case, you make the point it's really Goliath versus Goliath. Do you see any benefit in terms of bringing the Wall Street to a wider audience and democratizing the financial markets? That isn't what happened here. It's more sort of a rigged game for the professionals is what we're watching.
I do think that the largest Wall Street players have these very deep structural advantages. And I say that as somebody who used to work there. I absolutely think that there are some retail traders that made a lot of money throughout this whole GameStop saga, and I would not dispute that. But there are also probably a lot of people who bought at the top and perhaps lost money that they couldn't afford to lose. And so I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. You know, I think financial literacy is always a good goal to achieve, but I've never really been somebody that's convinced that financial literacy is a good anti-poverty program. I think, you know, last year's stimulus and this year's stimulus is a much better, more effective anti-poverty program than perhaps, you know, trying your luck in the financial markets, which can be very risky.
Well, that kind of goes against the whole idea that if you give someone, you know, you give them it's old and hackneyed, but you give them a fish, they eat the fish, you teach them how to fish, and they catch their own fish. It kind of goes against that. And I mean, just giving out stimulus money, how many times, what are we going to do? UBI? Universal basic income. I mean, it would help if people knew how to plan for their retirement. You make the point that order flow, maybe you should, being paid for order flow, you would actually possibly prohibit that from happening. And you suggest that anyone who tries to save for retirement has to give Wall Street a cut. has to give it, and you want a public option for people to try to plan for retirement. What does that even mean, Alexis?
So right now, if you want to save for retirement, there's really only two ways that you can do it without having a Wall Street middleman. You can invest in a savings bond directly with the government, which doesn't give you a very high rate of return. Or if you're pretty wealthy, you could buy a municipal bond. But it doesn't need to be that way. Those are a bunch of policy choices that we've made. If you go back to the New Deal, there was a very large public entity called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which invested in a lot of public projects. And there's a really interesting proposal called the National Investment Authority by a professor out of Cornell named Saleh Omarova that makes the argument that private markets are really bad at funding things that last more than a lifetime to show a return on their investment, these sort of moonshot projects that may take a really long time. And so the idea behind that proposal is you would have a public investment fund that could fund things like roads and infrastructures, but also maybe, going to Mars or beyond Mars, things that might take a very long time and the government might be better suited to invest in than the private markets. And that would also give people a way to invest in public projects instead of having to give Wall Street a cut every time they put money in their 401k or participate in the financial markets.
Well, some of this, if you're not doing a GameStop trade, if you're doing more conventional investing where, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, your 401k or whatever you were using, you were investing long-term into the S&P or S&P stocks. I mean, on the transaction costs you're talking about are literally fractions of a penny or pennies per share. And over 5 or 10 years, you've seen there's nothing that grows at 7% a year other than Wall Street or stocks. So it just seems like you're talking about, I don't even know if the fees you're talking about, that Wall Street's cut is even material to someone that's trying to save for retirement. And if they had the financial knowledge and training and wherewithal to be able to evaluate Graham and Dodd type situations and growth, I don't see why that's a bad thing. I can't imagine turning it over to the government. I wouldn't want to turn my money over to the government for them to help grow it for retirement, because I'm going to end up getting back probably less than I put in.
Well, I think everyone likes choice, and so I don't think anyone would be forcing you to invest in a national investment authority. But I do think it would be nice to have the option, which is why I call it a sort of public option for Wall Street. But I think that the issue here is not that people don't want to invest in the private markets, and not that if you buy and hold, that's a bad strategy. I think over time that has proven to be a good strategy. The issue is 47% of the country has no access to the stock market, has no pension, has no 401k, because people are living paycheck to paycheck. And my argument is, I do think that there are policy decisions that have led to people living on the edges of society like that, and we should work to boost them up. And I think the stimulus payments have been a really life-saving thing that has helped some of those people who don't have the excess capital to invest in the financial markets, who might be facing eviction, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who don't have $300 to cover an emergency. So it's a both and, it's not an either or.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks.
We essentially have a disagreement between the progressive candidates and the moderate candidates about whether or not we want to pursue a universal benefit for higher education and make it a public good, much in the way that K through 12 education is treated as a public good. And I believe, and I think the data bears out, that when you make benefits universal, they are more resilient, they are more robust, they can withstand attacks that come from austerity, that even come from reactionaryism. We see this with Medicaid, and we see this with Social Security, which are incredibly popular across the political spectrum and have withstood many attacks by past administrations to reform them, to privatize them, to reduce them. And so I think people also need to remember that there used to be free public college in the United States in California prior to the election of Governor Ronald Reagan. And then he essentially made that a signature issue in his campaign and really began the end to free public college in California, which has sort of been reduced ever since. And there also used to be free public college in the state of New York in the CUNY system. And so this isn't a new concept for us in the United States, but it's treated as if it's something strange and something we should be skeptical of. You know, the mayor of South Bend has always used this as an attempt to wedge people and say, oh, well, we don't want to give this benefit to millionaires and billionaires. Millionaires and billionaires, first of all, send their children to public colleges at a much lower rate than the rest of the population. You know, as someone who is, you know, I'm queer, and I know that there are a lot of people who sometimes are disowned by their families. And I'm a little disappointed, frankly, to see, you know, the first, you know, openly gay, major, you know, Democratic primary candidate sort of ignore that simple fact that sometimes, you know, LGBTQ folks are disowned from their families. And so if you have a millionaire or billionaire who disowns their LGBTQ child, you know, they won't be able to access public college. But I think the most important point here is that we need to build programs that can resist any attacks on them wherever they come from. One of the things that we saw, you know, we've seen historically, there was a 2018 study that sociologists put out that said that if white Americans see that a benefits program is going to benefit Black Americans, they are less likely to approve of it and to be in favor of it. And one of the ways that you can tackle that kind of sort of racism really is with universal programs where everyone benefits and you don't have either racial resentment or class resentment. Now, I should mention that usually those perceptions by white Americans are completely false. There's lots of data and lots of studies that show that white Americans think that Black Americans and brown Americans benefit from programs like SNAP and TANF at rates that are far lower than they do. White Americans often make up the majority of those programs. But this is a real decision point, I think, for the Democratic Party. And I think going the route of universal benefits is really the way to go. Amy, you also mentioned Warren's plan yesterday.
10 seconds.
Oh, about the student debt cancellation plan. That's something that would benefit the entire economy for all. If we cancel student debt, that's going to benefit everyone, and that's a real strong reason, in my opinion, to do it. There's a study that says $108 billion a year over 10 years boost to the economy if we cancel student debt.
Oh, yeah.
Alexis Goldstein. Alexis.
Hi.
My goodness. We're back. Thank you. You know, you're the first person that I can say welcome back to the show on their first appearance. I have to let people know because I was so mortified. You and I did this interview this afternoon, and for whatever reason, I forgot to hit record, and I was just crestfallen. Such a great interview. I was like, my goodness, that was amazing. I tell my wife, and then I realize I didn't record. I spoke to some friends because I was like, should I, you know, she's a busy person. I found out in the interim, by the way, that just prior to this, you were on Twitch with AOC. So now you're slumming on the Ted Alexander show, and we don't even press record.
Well, if it makes you feel better, A, I've done this myself before. B, we go way back, right? So I'm gonna show up when you call me, and if it makes you feel any better, AOC had about 30 minutes of audio problems where we all didn't know if it was even going to happen. They had to shut the Twitch down and start it back up. And so you're in good company.
Okay, good. That does make me feel better. And I cannot thank you enough because I truly was crestfallen, and you were kind enough to reschedule. So thank you, Alexis.
Sure. Happy to be here.
So let's jump right in. We were discussing the GameStop phenomenon this week, all of the insanity, and specifically the narrative around it that a lot of people are pushing, this kind of David and Goliath narrative of this ragtag group of Redditors who are taking on the behemoth of the Wall Street hedge funds. But you had a little bit of a different take. Can you talk about your perspective on that?
So my background is I used to work on Wall Street. I was there for 7 years. I quit in 2010, and
Hi Alexis, and thank you for your time. I'm super late in my question, but how did you end up on our GME in the first place? This place was created after WSB became compromised, and we've been called tinfoil hat conspiracists. Do you personally believe that the MOASS is still to come?
I tried to post in WSB and it was initially auto-flagged. They fixed it later. In the meantime, some people suggested I post here instead. I have found you all to be quite welcoming. I think GameStop volatility will continue because there are now just too many eyes on it, and too many people with FOMO. However, I don't think it's likely you'll see another giant short squeeze. That's what you mean by MOASS, right? Because no one wants to get caught on the other end of that again. Option premiums on GameStop /GME implied volatility are still through the roof, too, and I presume will be for some time. Option sellers are going to demand a major premium for taking on risk of it going haywire again.
Okay, we have a problem. Why is there no unicorn award? Unicorn, 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 unicorn.
Maybe we should ask Steve Huffman.
Hey Alexis, thank you for coming. I'm curious, have you seen people get away with corruption in your early days? I'm really interested how big of a corruption problem you guys have there in the US. I cannot understand how it's possible to reset FTDs. How it's possible that people can short ladder attack and get away with it, aren't they leaving a mark behind? Thank you once again for having us.
I'll leave it at what I've written previously, but perhaps the zenith of Wall Street fitness is the unpunished cheat. Around the holiday season, interdealer brokers will send gifts to the traders, trying to curry favor with bottles of wine or champagne. Interdealer brokers are brokers who allow Wall Street banks to anonymously trade with one another, since the last thing you want to do if you're Morgan Stanley is let Goldman Sachs know your position, though you may still want to trade with them. But there is a catch to the gift giving. According to FINRA, Wall Street's self-regulatory agency, the brokers are only allowed to spend a maximum of $100 per trader. On slow winter days, the traders would Google the bottles of wine, trying to determine which vendors had cheated. Often they would find that, yes, this vendor breached the limit. The response to the cheat was always the same, a smirk, and an approving nod. It's not about who cheated. It's about who cheated successfully. This attitude extends to higher stakes games as well. Take the case SEC v. Citigroup Global Markets, Incorporated. According to the SEC, in 2007 Citigroup sold their clients a portfolio of assets, mortgage-backed securities, as it happens, that Citi was actively betting against. The SEC therefore charged Citigroup with securities fraud. It's been reported that the fearsome regulatory agency won't settle for anything less than a $285 million fine. Looks bad, right? Well, yes, unless you consider that, according to Forbes, Citigroup allegedly made $160 million on this one deal, investors lost $700 million. Citigroup looks like it's going to lose $125 million. But how many similar deals have gone unprosecuted? If the answer is 1, Citigroup is back in the black. If the answer is, as surely it must be, more than 1, then Citigroup is doing very well, thank you. This is why paying fines when you are caught breaking the rules is simply deemed the cost of doing business on Wall Street. Poker is extremely popular across Wall Street, and provides an instructive lesson. The book Poker Winners Are Different by industrial psychologist and poker advisor Alan Schoonmaker presents a scenario where a player notices his best friend's tell, that is, the best friend has a habit of showing when he has a good or bad hand. The book then poses the following dilemma: should you, a. tell your friend, b. win a bit of money from him, and then tell him, or c. exploit your friend, never telling him? The correct answer: screw your friend. Schoonmaker, who used to do management development work at Merrill Lynch, writes that winners will do whatever the rules and ethics allow to maximize their profits. This behavior is heralded in poker and it's heralded on Wall Street. Despite what may be emblazoned on plaques or in mission statements, the ethics of Wall Street are purely about winning at any cost.
Have there been any other major financial events that have garnered you as much or greater attention as GME?
The 2008 financial crisis. I was working on Wall Street at the time. I wrote a bit about it here. And I also appear in the PBS Frontline documentary Money, Power, and Wall Street, Episode 4, and talk about it a bit there.
Hi Alexis, thank you so much for doing this. There was class action suit QS Holdco v Bank of America that was filed against BOA, GS and other Equi-Lend Bank board members in 2017, alleging collusion, intimidation and other anti-competitive practices. The behavior was said to be designed to keep the stock lending market as opaque and profitable as possible, of which defendants controlled 70% of order flow. Are you aware of the case? What are your thoughts on the conduct alleged? Could the opacity created by Equi-Lend have helped create or maintain the short squeeze situation on GameStop? What impact do you see the recent DTCC rule changes having on the current state of affairs for Equi-Lend and the market as a whole?
Let me look more closely another time and I will circle back if I can.
A little late to the party, but I was wondering what you think we can do to better understand the systems at play and improve our situations. For example, I volunteer in LGBTQ and veteran policy advocacy, but want to get involved in financial reform, because economic justice is social justice. My day job is as a HR professional at a corporate VC. We have apes from all different walks of life here. How can we educate ourselves and position ourselves to become better citizens? What can we do to help ensure this never happens again?
What a great question. And I agree with you that economic justice is social justice. As an aside, Representative Mondaire Jones, for example, has recently highlighted why cancelling student debt is a LGBTQ issue in addition to a racial justice issue. A few ideas. The SEC Investor Bulletin's often a good source for information. If you are thinking beyond the realm of investing and into consumer finance broadly, I think the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, is a great agency that puts out a lot of good reports, including on veterans, so may be of interest to you. And I hope people know that they can always complain to the CFPB if they have an issue with a consumer financial company. You can follow Real Bank Reform or Roosevelt Institute or Groundwork Collaborative or the Center for Equitable Growth on Twitter. I try to cover these issues at my newsletter, Markets Weekly, and over at my Twitter.
What are your ideal toppings on a baked potato?
I hope this doesn't get me booted from the UMA, but I don't really like baked potatoes.
Do you agree pineapple goes on pizza?
Yes.
Hi Alexis, thanks for taking the time. Do you really think we the people can have enough influence to have effective structure changes to the system?
I do. Especially right now, I think there's a big change to engage with Congress and the regulators to make some positive change. Here's some thoughts here.
Thank you, and no, pineapple doesn't go on pizza. Yes, but baked potatoes are too dry. Anyway, I think she meant chance not change there as well. I thought the baked potato thing was bad. I can't unsee it now.
Sorry to baked potatoes.
What is your favorite form of cooked potatoes? Fried, mashed, in a gratin, something else entirely?
I have to go with fried or gratin.
When you were working in Wall Street, what were some strategies you used that helped you survive the game? Did you have a poker face the whole time?
Taking time off when I could, which I'm afraid was rare, and having friends outside the industry to keep me grounded in reality.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing an armor with us. Posting again as I think my question has fallen into the abyss. Hi Alexis. Thank you so much for this. I suspect that retail has been buying synthetic shares and probably holds a very large quantity of them. I am concerned that the shares that I own are not real shares. Is there anything I can do to make sure that I have real shares as opposed to synthetic? What would happen if real shares would need to be located in a situation where I decided to hold the shares in my own name by transferring them to a transfer agent? Would real shares be allocated to me then? How can they locate the real shares?
Do you mean using option positions to go synthetically long? Like a very deep ITM call?
I think the op is asking if there's a difference between holding shares from the original float, and if there are more shares in existence from synthetic long-short positions that haven't been cleared up through the FTD process.
The trouble with GameStop is that the house still wins. We can't beat Wall Street at its own zero-sum game. But we can change the rules. By Alexis Goldstein. Miss Goldstein is a former Wall Street professional who works at an organization that advocates financial reform. The 1st of February, 2021 credit, Nick Zieminski /Reuters. Last week, an alluring narrative coalesced around a band of Davids taking on the Goliaths of finance. Thousands of so-called retail traders who came together on Reddit have been using apps like Robinhood to buy stock and options of GameStop, the beleaguered video game retailer, jacking up its value some 1,700% last month. In the process, they've blown up a few hedge funds that had bet on GameStop's failure. The appeal of such a narrative is obvious. Wall Street profits have blasted off during the
What are your thoughts on Congress passing a bill that implemented these stock market reforms? Feel free to ignore those you've already addressed in your other responses. Transaction fees. If there were a, say 1% transaction fee on buying and selling a stock, this would limit the advantages that algorithms provide hedge funds. It would also discourage day trading. I believe you already mentioned this, but I wanted to know what you were thinking as far as the transaction fee. Stocks on blockchain require that all stocks use blockchain technology, so they can be tracked in real time. This would not only make for easier trading, it would also prevent trading in ghost shares and other hedge fund tactics. Prevent investment firms from selling investor trading information to hedge funds unless they provide the same information to the general public at the same time. By selling investor information, platforms like Robinhood essentially ensure that hedge funds will be able to identify market trends before retail investors. This eliminates all competitiveness in the market. Raise the amount SEC can fine companies to 10x the profit gained. As I understand it, the SEC can currently fine investors 3x what they gained for illegal practices, but to avoid lengthy court battles, they usually settle out of court for a smaller amount. By raising the limit to 10x the profit gained, it would give the SEC more leverage to avoid taking companies to court while at the same time discouraging illegal practices with higher punitive fees. The SEC would also make more money and therefore have more money available to pursue additional illegal practices. Stipulations preventing Treasury employees from working for private financial institutions for a period of 2 years after they hold their Treasury positions.
No one is suggesting a financial transaction tax that high, 1%. The proposals are more in the realm of 0.1% or so. I think adding a very small transaction tax would reduce the power of high-frequency traders like Citadel or Renaissance Technology, and this could lead to less volatility in the market overall. Proposals like the Wall Street Tax Act or the Inclusive Prosperity Act would put in place a Wall Street sales tax at rates of a fraction of a percent, at most 50 cents per $100 of stocks traded. The government estimates that would raise more than $750 billion over 10 years. Wall Street tends to push back very hard when people suggest a financial transaction tax, but this ignores that fact that the SEC's operations are already funded in part by a very small fee on certain transactions. The UK has a stamp tax and their market didn't melt down. The UK imposes 2 stamp duty taxes that impact financial transactions. The first is stamp duty, which applies to instruments that transfer certificated shares, i.e., shares that are traded off exchange through physical transfer, at a rate of 0.5%. The transfer is generally processed with a stock transfer form.
Is it reasonable to start with giving retail a fair chance in the market before we start cancelling student debt, increasing taxes, etc.?
We can walk and chew gum. Cancelling student debt is a question the President/the Department of Education can do without Congress. Making sure the markets are working for retail investors is a question for the SEC, CFTC, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and some of the macroprudential regulators.
Hi Alexis, thank you for being a part of this community. Having individuals with experience, credentials, and expertise really expands this place from a subreddit to a powerful community with real-world impact. My Q, what are some basic actions everyday people, Redditors, can take to get the attention of those with power to challenge, regulate the rampant criminal and illegal activity in the stock market? As an everyday person, it is extremely demoralizing and infuriating at times to witness the corruption, know that the government and SEC know about it, yet still see very little being done. As an average investor in GME, it's essentially impossible to feel at this time that the market is fair. Yet, as Americans, we've been told this amazing lie, that we have an innate right and privilege as citizens to participate in free and fair markets, and in the greatest economy in the world. Wow, what a load of crap. This time people won't be fooled. Either this actually becomes the case or people will pull their dollar in order to simply stop dealing with the absolute crookery and knob stroking that our financial system permits. It's really quite disgusting. As this journey has continued, the information regarding naked short selling, hiding FTDS, etc., 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 has been becoming clearer and clearer week after week. There is no question that blatant market manipulation is happening. Right now it feels like Reddit has more real-world impact than the government, the SEC, and all regulatory bodies, and that is very troubling. Q2, on a more philosophical note, I want to ask that in your opinion, based on your work experience and what you see with Wall Street, do you think there is even a possibility at this point in time for Wall Street to even remotely tame its hyper-predatory and bloodthirsty tactics? I mean, is any kind of fundamental shift in the makeup and psyche of these institutions possible? As a depth psychologist, I think Wall Street traders represent probably one of the most fascinating, important, and horrifying case studies of the modern world. The psychology present is not to looked over. One of the most distinct characteristics is a lack of empathy. Enacted at the level it has been, the results are truly horrific. '08 was just a glimpse of what this kind of unchecked behavior leads to. One thing I know about addiction is this: there is a very common fallacy to think that once you get it out of your system, you'll be good. Any addict know that is BS, and rather what happens is it gets worse. Your tolerance goes up, not down, and now the only thing that will make you feel better is something even more intense. What I really see in our financial industry and in the markets is a stark reality: brilliant minds and industries throttled by the disease of addiction in various forms. Greed, power, wealth, ego, being right, drugs, sex, fame, etc. The fact that these are largely the people who make major decisions for the population, whether aware of it or not, is a really difficult pill to swallow, but one we need to as a society if we are to move forward. I think this discussion needs to be had and fleshed out. Until the people realize what is happening there, I doubt there will be change.
Q1. Weigh in with the SEC on their proposed rules. Contact your senators and representative and let them know what reforms you are hoping to see. More on this here.
Not sure if the armor is still on. I am reposting. Hello Alexis. Thank you for your work and insights. Your comments in recent weeks have been the smartest I have seen in the media. I have two questions. Is the DTCC actually moving this fast in response to the GME saga? If you were in the shoes of the hedge funds, what would you do to get out of the mess? Trying to understand what could they do to scuttle the long positions.
I mean, hedge funds have a lot of different strategies, and many of them may be long GME at this point, at least in the short term. This has always been my general thesis, that GME may have been ignited by retail, but there are likely big institutional players involved as well. I spoke about this a bit on the BBC, and at my newsletter.
Do you have any stories for us from your career? 3 days no market make apes dull apes.
One time one of the traders bet someone in operations if they would drink the grease at the bottom of a tray of chicken wings. He did. He lived, if you were wondering.
Is Gary Gensler going to do anything to help retail or at least push for more regulation?
Gensler was a very strong advocate for investors when he ran the CFTC, so his nomination is promising. The appeal of such a narrative is obvious. Wall Street profits have blasted off during the pandemic, while Main Street endures intense and prolonged suffering, a phenomenon that economists call a K-shaped recovery. Americans have waited 10 months and counting for consistent relief from the government. So the idea of get-rich-quick schemes, especially ones animated by a zeal for revenge against the billionaire class, are more compelling than ever. But the unfortunate irony is that this desire to stick it to the fat cats of high finance is likely only to spur higher profits for big banks and hedge funds.
You don't fight the volume. Answering this question requires speculation. If you're not here for speculation, I totally get it. How do you see this whole scenario playing out? We obviously have massive money on both sides of this play. You've got retail in the middle, and we've got the bottomless pit of short positions. You stated earlier that the MOASS is essentially off the table, so how do you think this ends?
My best bet is that I think GME will continue to be like a roller coaster, lots of volatility. I genuinely don't know how it ends.
Hello Alexis. Thank you for doing this. You mentioned you're a programmer. Out of curiosity, what does the tech stack look like? If one wanted to get into fintech, what languages should they focus on, and how does one pivot into fintech from regular tech?
I think which language you choose matters less than finding one you like and getting some practice in it. Once you learn one language, it's easier to learn another one. If you like investing, I do think Python is particularly handy, since there are a lot of tools for scraping data.
Posting again, as I think my question has fallen into the abyss. Hi Alexis. Thank you so much for this. I suspect that retail has been buying synthetic shares and probably holds a very large quantity of them. I am concerned that the shares that I own are not real shares. Is there anything I can do to make sure that I have real shares as opposed to synthetic? What would happen if real shares would need to be located in a situation where I decided to hold the shares in my own name by transferring them to a transfer agent? Would real shares be allocated to me then? How can they locate the real shares?
Do you mean using option positions to go synthetically long? Like a very deep ITM call?
What I mean is that it seems like short sellers have oversold GME. There are more shares owned by participants than there should be in existence. This makes me think that retail traders have been buying synthetic shares. Which leads me to fear that I don't currently own the actual shares.
I'm just still not sure what you mean by synthetic shares. The main way I know to go synthetically long a stock is with options. The real solution to breaking the power of finance is to rebalance the recession-racked economy. Rather than gambling on the dubious promise of more Americans gaining access to the casino, it's time to rewrite the rules to ensure that the house doesn't always win.
Hi Alexis, not going to give you a super interesting question or anything, but are you doing okay? Emotionally, mentally? Things aren't easy right now, so take this question as a drink some water, check your posture, look at a cute cat video, moment winking face.
This is a very nice question and I appreciate it. It's been a little hard because I recently lost my amazing cat Tito. I appreciate you reminding me to drink water, and asking a thoughtful question. I hope you are also taking it easy right now, too. Wall Street's edge over retail traders remains, as always, structural, superior data, sophisticated, high-frequency trading software. More important, its traders have access to dark pools, private exchanges where they send large orders quietly to avoid moving the market against the trade, and over-the-counter markets, where they trade with one another rather than on public exchanges. They pour money into research and rumor chasing, all in an attempt to determine the positions of their competitors. Armed with its high-frequency trading algorithms and privileged market data, Wall Street will always win out over the thousands of people posting their positions and their plans on public message boards. These retail traders betting on GameStop's rise may have blown up hedge funds like Melvin Capital, which lost 53% of its value in January after betting that GameStop's stock would fall. But other hedge funds are likely to profit off its troubles in the long run by scooping up a stake in Melvin Capital's future revenues in exchange for an emergency cash infusion. One such hedge fund, Citadel LLC, further benefits from the actions of the Robinhood traders. Citadel's market-making arm and other Wall Street institutions offer Robinhood money to execute its clients' orders, an arrangement called payment for order flow. The idea was originated by Bernie Madoff in the 1980s. In 2016, the Securities and Exchange Commission questioned whether it should be banned. Citadel then profits by trading ahead of Robinhood users. It's possible that banks like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are also riding high on the GameStop surge, just as they did in the second quarter of the pandemic, when JP Morgan Chase saw record trading revenue because of its ability to profit from market swings. In this way, the largest Wall Street firms run flow trading desks that act as middlemen. They act as both a buyer and a seller of stocks, options and other financial products, while offsetting their own risks through hedges. When I worked at Merrill Lynch from 2007 to 2009, the equity derivatives trading desks took in the biggest profits on the most volatile days. That's because they are mostly agnostic to price movements, essentially making money on volume and market churn. What this means is that trying to beat Wall Street at its own zero-sum game, one where any gain is offset by an equal-size loss, is a hopeless proposition. Instead, the solution is to fight austerity to save people from the lure of a speculative frenzy.
Thank you so much for being here, Mrs. Goldstein. I want to relax the atmosphere a little by asking you some gaming-related questions, and I'll be so honored if you could answer. What's your favorite video game? Which one marked you forever? Thanks in advance for everything.
Final Fantasy VII is legendary. I binge played it till I finished it. I recently played the remake and really enjoyed that, too. Have you heard about the book Luster by Raven Leilani? She said, I learned about storytelling from Final Fantasy.
Who's Thevil, and why shouldn't I fight him?
Vol equals volatility, and fighting against volatility can get you run over.
What does your username mean? Volume, as in volatility. Then again, I shouldn't be the one to dive in usernames, lol.
Yes, vol as in volatility. In a sense, the United States has seen all this before. Clinton-era welfare reform, along with his lowering of capital gains taxes and deregulation of the financial services industry, doubled the number of people living in extreme poverty. In the meantime, the rich pulled further ahead and helped inflate the dot-com bubble. Ahead of the 2008 crash, Wall Street banks sold borrowers cash-out refinance home loans, with predatory credit filling the gap left by stagnant wages. The crash decimated Black and Latino wealth, which dropped by more than half. In the wake of the 2008 crisis, research showed that gambling in the lotteries increased among those who continued to struggle financially through the recession. Reddit and Robinhood are driving a new kind of financial lottery, trading cheap options that require giant price moves to become profitable. As further economic support remains in limbo largely because of Republican intransigence, the GameStop narrative may entice many to try their hand at the financial markets. Viktor Yakovenko, a physicist at the University of Maryland, found a correlation between speculative bubbles and periods of greatest inequality. But those who tend to make the most during these bubbles are the already wealthy. Democratizing the economy, then, involves curbing speculation and pouring national resources into lifting up Americans and rebuilding public institutions. Canceling federal student debt, which President Biden can do without Congress, would grow the economy, relieve the disproportionate debt burdens carried by Black and brown borrowers, and incentivize science and engineering graduates to consider careers benefiting the public good. A modest wealth tax could be redirected to priorities like universal child care. Lawmakers should ensure hedge funds aren't taking advantage of regulatory blind spots to make themselves too big to fail. A very small financial transaction tax could fund investments in reducing the racial wealth gap through programs like baby bonds. The country needs transformational policies that tackle our dire economic state. Instead, President Biden is entertaining what are most likely insufficient Republican counteroffers to his relief package, as the speculation frenzy moves on to silver. If there's one thing I learned on Wall Street, it's that traders are, at their core, both self-interested and singularly devoted to the zero-sum game. Trying to mimic this with zero-sum policies that seek to supposedly democratize access to financial markets and disrupt old ways of thinking helped get us into this mess. But bold investments in public institutions can get us out.
You mentioned that you don't believe MOASS is likely given what happened in January and no one wants to be caught on the wrong end again. Is that assuming that the shorts have covered the positions? Thanks for doing this.
I want to stress that I don't have a crystal ball. I just think enough shorts got burned that people are probably more cautious now than they were before. And anyone selling options on GME are demanding very high premiums for taking the risk. You can see this in the implied volatility levels on GME options. But anything can happen, of course. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, etc. etc.
Doesn't that correlate better with the likelihood of a gamma squeeze rather than a short squeeze? Still stunned that pineapple on a pizza is okay with you, but here's a different and more important question: Tabasco, Tapatio, Cholula, Frank's, other hot sauce, or no hot sauce at all, ever? Also, thank you for taking the time to answer the more serious questions on here, Alexis.
I just like the pineapple. I just like the pineapple. I just like the pineapple. I just like the pineapple.
I understand the allure of Robinhood. When I first learned about Robinhood, I thought it showed great promise. Ms. Goldstein, payment for order flow, which was pioneered by the fraudster Bernie Madoff, allows brokers like Robinhood to make huge profits by routing their customers' orders to market makers like Citadel instead of sending them directly to an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange, even if it means brokers won't obtain the most favorable trading terms for investors. Can you please explain whether you think these disturbing conflicts can ever be truly mitigated in such a way that guarantee brokers and other market participants are acting in the best interest of their customers?
Chairwoman Waters, thank you for the question and thank you for holding this hearing today. I think it's a very if we look back to 2016 in the Obama administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission wrote a memo to its Equity Market Structure Advisory Committee, and it identified a series of potential conflicts with payment for order flow. They thought it might interfere with a broker's duty to receive best execution for their customers. They thought it might create perverse incentives for them to route their orders to market makers instead of to lit exchanges. And they identified that it may, in fact, be obscuring the true costs that customers are paying for their order flow. I like to liken it to sort of Facebook, right? If you are not paying for something, that often means that you yourself are the product. And Robinhood, many years ago, made upwards of 80% of their revenue from payment for order flow. And that SEC enforcement action that you identified, they pointed out that they hid that information for their customers after the publication of the best-selling book Flash Boys made payment for order flow somewhat unpopular. They took it off of their frequently asked questions page. So I do think that the Securities and Exchange Commission should revisit all of those questions that they had previously in 2016 in the Obama administration. They should ask, should this practice be prohibited? Is it too confusing? Does it mask the true cost of the trade? Or should brokers be required to pass these payments on to their customers, which could be another way to address the problem?
Hi Alexis, thank you for all of your time. Not sure if this has been asked, but what are a few of your favorite books? Thanks.
Thank you so much for asking me. If the question is about options, IMO, the very best book on options trading is the one by Sheldon Natenberg. It's called Option Volatility and Pricing, Advanced Trading Strategies and Techniques, the second edition, or you can get the first edition, still great, but it's cheaper. It's very dense, but it's so informative. If you really want to understand options, I'd start here. If you're asking about all books I love, Thick by Tracy McMillan Cottom, non-fiction, Patsy by Nicole Dennis Benn, fiction, and the book M-Train, which I think of as a love letter to coffee.
I always wondered if it would be hard being in a position of power, where you see both hundreds of millions as a small cost of doing business, as well as people in the country dying because they're rationing insulin. What is the general feeling among the circles you run in about the crushing levels of poverty in the same country where billions are made?
In my circles, the general sense is that we need our government to do a lot more to get relief out and unrig the rules so they work for everyone, not just the well-connected. That's gonna take a lot of people pushing for it together, but it's possible.
For that. Ms. Goldstein, in your testimony, you mentioned that GameStop incident revealed more than just volatile stock prices. You mentioned that the rise of retail trading and the dominance of certain hedge funds like Citadel could threaten the stability of our financial system. What do you think that regulators such as FSOC should do to keep the volatility that we saw in January from infecting our whole financial system? And what can Congress do to help our regulators do their job?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Garcia. I think there used to be a hedge fund working group at the FSOC that was shut down under the Trump administration. And before they created it, one of the things that they noted in a report was that there was no single regulator that had all the information that they needed to look at a complete risk profile of hedge funds. And so I think an easy thing for Secretary Yellen to do would be to restart the hedge fund working group to look at risk to the system that hedge funds possibly contribute. I also think that Citadel Securities is a particular thing that they should look at closely.
I just like the pineapple. I just like the pineapple. Hi, do you have any comments on the Archegos Capital situation?
I do. I wrote a post about it here. What happened with Archegos Capital? Last week, Viacom CBS lost half its value. But Viacom's woes turned into a $33 billion fire sale thanks to Archegos Capital, total return swaps, and leverage. Alexis Goldstein, the 31st of March, 2021. Last week, Viacom CBS positively tanked, losing half its value in more than a week. But Viacom's woes turned into a $33 billion market-wide asset liquidation event thanks to the holdings of a family fund, Archegos Capital, run by Sung Kook, Bill, Hwang. Why the troubles at Archegos led to market-wide fire sales is due to a combination of things: what Archegos was trading, derivatives that mimic stocks, called total return swaps, and the leverage Archegos employed in doing these trades, who Archegos was trading with, a number of large banks, the lack of disclosures. Many banks were on the same side of the same trade, which exacerbated the fire sale. But that fact appeared largely unknown till it all went bust. Fire sale. What was Archegos Capital doing? Reporting indicates that Archegos' long positions were concentrated in about 8 names: Viacom CBS, Viac, Discovery Incorporated, Disca, Tencent Music Entertainment Group, TME, GSX Techadu Incorporated, GSX, Baidu Incorporated, Bidu, Farfetch Limited, FTCH, EGI Incorporated, IQ, Vipshop Holdings Limited, VIPs. But Archegos wasn't buying stocks in these companies. Instead, perhaps in order to avoid the kinds of disclosures that are required when you hold a certain amount of stocks, Archegos used derivatives that mimic the performance of stocks, but don't have the same disclosure requirements. One of the derivatives they used are called total return swaps, TRS, also known as an equity swap. Sidebar: what is a total return swap, TRS? You can think of a TRS as a financial product that provides nearly the same economic payoffs as a stock, but it isn't a stock, it's a swap. Swaps are financial instruments where two parties swap payments. You can read more about swaps here. In a total return swap, one party makes payments based on the return of an underlying reference asset. The other party makes payments based on a preset rate. This arrangement allows the receiving party to receive all the economic benefits of a reference asset, like a stock's income and capital gains, without actually owning the asset. Why might you do this? One might do it to try and avoid taxes of owning the stock outright. You might do it to gain access to a stock in a country that you have to live in to purchase. Or, you might do it, as it seems Archegos may have done, to avoid disclosing what you own to the public. But this arrangement creates credit risks for the TRS pair. And that risk broke wide open last week for Archegos counterparties, which included a number of major banks. Who was Archegos trading with? Archegos had what's called a prime broker relationship with a number of major banks, including Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, UBS and Nomura. Sidebar: what's a prime broker? Large banks offer a number of bundled services to hedge funds and large private funds through an offering called prime brokerage. These services can include borrowing securities, via securities lending, executing trades, including trades that use leverage, and cash management. If you'd like a concrete example, here's a PDF from Morgan Stanley marking their prime brokerage offering. I gotta run. Thanks everyone for the discussion today. I just like the pineapple.